Commander, let's light the sky. Training sharper drone pilots, learning how to fly. Mission ready mindset, safety leading every plan. Skills that build confidence from takeoff through the scan. Tune in at Sky Commander, come join the crew today. Learning smart, fly with purpose, level up your way. We see more, no sooner, that's the edge we're here to spread. See above, go beyond, get ahead.
Okay, let's get started. Imagine this. You're standing right in the middle of a freezing, windswept field.
Oh yeah, we've all been there.
Right. Your hands are completely numb on the controller sticks, but you honestly don't even care because the golden hour light is it's hitting the landscape perfectly.
That magic window.
Exactly. The shadows are long, the sky is bursting with this incredible magenta and gold, and you are executing this sweeping, complex orbit maneuver.
Nice.
And you look down at your monitor and you have just captured an absolute cinematic masterpiece.
The best feeling in the world.
It is. You land the drone, you feel like an absolute genius, you rush home, pull the SD card, and you drop those files right into your editing timeline.
And let me guess, it looks terrible.
It's awful. The sky is this washed out, murky gray. The shadows are just a noisy, buzzing mess.
Yep.
The crisp autumn leaves look like they were painted with radioactive sludge. So you try to push the contrast, you try to boost the color, and the whole image just instantly falls apart into chunky, pixelated garbage.
Just heartbreaking.
It really is. What in the world just happened?
Well, that is the single most frustrating universal experience in modern drone operations. I mean, without a doubt. And the immediate reaction is almost always to blame the hardware.
Oh, for sure. You think the drone is broken.
Exactly. You sit there at your desk thinking the sensor's trash, or, you got shipped a defective unit, or maybe you should have spent an extra $3,000 on a heavier rig.
Right, like it's a gear problem.
But the brutal mathematical truth is that 9 times out of 10, the camera did exactly what it was instructed to do. The hardware didn't fail. The capture philosophy failed.
The capture philosophy. Okay, let's unpack this because that is the entire mission of our deep dive today. We are taking a massive stack of source materials, highly technical engineering white papers from Sony and Canon.
Really dense stuff, yeah.
Yeah, super dense workflow documentation from Adobe and Blackmagic, hardware specs, and even the dry, rigid aviation regulations from the FAA and Transport Canada.
A fun legal reading.
Right, the stuff nobody wants to read. And we are synthesizing all of it. We are decoding the capture philosophy of professional drone video workflows.
Which is so needed.
It is, because today isn't a tutorial on, which buttons to press in the menu. This is a complete teardown of how to read light, how to match your flight mission to your post-production workflow, and understanding that professional color actually starts long before those propellers ever spin.
I love that. And we have to start by completely dismantling a very toxic habit in the drone community.
Oh, what's that?
Most operators treat color profiles like they're just Instagram filters.
Oh, wow. Yeah, they kind of do.
They really do. They scroll through the menu, normal, D-Log-M, S-Log-3, HLG, and they just pick the one that sounds the most cinematic.
Or the one their favorite YouTuber told them to use.
Exactly. But these aren't aesthetic filters at all. They are data storage strategies.
Data storage strategies.
Yeah. They are algorithmic decisions about how to squeeze the infinite chaotic light of the real world into a highly constrained, finite digital file.
Okay, so before we even get to the editing bay, we have to talk about the physics of what is happening inside that tiny little camera hanging off the gimbal.
It all starts there.
Because if we don't understand the physics, we can't understand the math. And if we don't understand the math, our footage is completely doomed.
It's a house of cards.
Right. So the scene we are flying over that real-world landscape with the sun and the shadows, that is pure, infinite light. Millions of photons hitting the sensor.
Right. And let's look at what that sensor actually is. It's really just a grid of microscopic photosites.
Okay.
When a photon hits a photosite, it generates a tiny electrical charge. The brighter the light, the more photons, the stronger the electrical charge. This is a completely linear process.
So twice as much light equals twice as much voltage.
Exactly. 1 + 1 is 2. But human vision doesn't work that way at all. Human vision is nonlinear.
How so?
Well, we are incredibly sensitive to tiny shifts in shadow details. It's probably an evolutionary trait to help us, spot predators hiding in the dark bushes.
That makes sense.
But we are terrible at distinguishing subtle differences in blindingly bright light.
So the camera sensor is capturing light perfectly mathematically, but our human eyes see light more like a curve.
Exactly. And the file formats we use to save video, like H.264, H.265, they simply do not have enough digital space to store the raw linear voltage data of every single photon.
Especially not at 60 frames per second.
Oh, not even close.
Yeah.
So the camera has to translate that linear electrical data into something that mimics human vision, and then it has to throw away a massive amount of information just to make the file small enough to write to your SD card.
Wow.
Yeah, and the color profile you choose in the drone's menu dictates exactly how it throws that information away.
Okay, let's use an analogy here just to make this really tangible for you listening. Imagine you have this incredibly tall, fragile object. Let's say it's an antique floor lamp.
An antique floor lamp, okay.
Yeah. It's got a heavy, detailed iron base and a delicate, intricately etched glass shade at the top. This lamp represents the dynamic range of your scene. The heavy base is your deep shadows, and the delicate glass shade is your bright highlights.
Right.
Now, you have to pack this lamp into a wooden shipping crate, but the crate is just slightly too short. That crate is your video file.
This is a great analogy.
So if you use a normal color profile, something based on the standard Rec. 709 color space, the camera basically acts like a frustrated packer. It just chops the very top of the glass shade off and chops the very bottom of the iron base off.
It just violently truncates the data.
It does. It forces the lamp to fit. Now, when you open the crate later, the middle of the lamp looks great. It's fully assembled. It's ready to plug in.
Right.
But the extreme highlights and extreme shadows are just gone. They were left on the cutting room floor.
And that is exactly what we call clipping. When you look at footage shot in a normal profile on a bright day, the sky might just be a flat, featureless white pixel.
So totally blown out.
Completely. There is no cloud detail, no blue gradient, just pure white. And the dark trees are just pure black. The camera literally stopped recording data beyond a certain voltage threshold.
Because the normal profile told it to?
Yes, it told it to prioritize the midtones, so the image would look punchy and finished immediately. Canon's technical papers are very clear about this, actually. Standard profiles bake in contrast and saturation.
Okay, but wait. If it destroys the highlights and shadows, why would anyone ever use a normal profile? Isn't that just objectively worse?
Not necessarily. It's a trade-off of time versus latitude. Normal profiles aren't beginner mode. They're efficient mode.
Efficient mode, okay.
Think about it. If you were filming a real estate property on a perfectly overcast day where the light is very soft, the lamp isn't actually that tall.
Oh, I see. It fits perfectly inside the crate without any chopping.
Exactly. In that scenario, a normal profile gives you a beautiful, vibrant image that you can hand to a client 5 minutes after you land. You don't have to spend 3 hours at a computer carefully rebuilding the contrast.
Okay, so that's the normal profile. But what if the sun comes out? What if the lamp is too tall? That brings us to the famous log profiles.
The infamous log profiles.
Right. S-log, D-log-M, Canon log. When people switch to these, the image on their monitor suddenly looks like absolute mud. It's gray, it's flat, all the color just drains out of it.
Well, going back to your lamp analogy, if log is the packer, it doesn't chop the top and bottom off. Instead, it completely disassembles the lamp.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it takes the heavy base, the middle pole, and the delicate glass shade, and it carefully packs them side by side into the crate. It creatively redistributes the information.
So it's a completely different packing method.
Mathematically, yes. A logarithmic curve takes the vast amount of data in the bright highlights and compresses it down, while simultaneously taking the very dark shadow data and stretching it up.
It flattens everything.
It flattens the entire dynamic range into this narrow band of middle gray values.
So it survives the trip in the shipping crate.
It survives the trip perfectly. No clipped white skies, no crushed black shadows, but, and this is the massive catch, when you open that crate at your editing desk, you don't have a lamp.
You just have a pile of parts.
Exactly. It requires assembly. Log shifts the decision-making burden completely away from the drone's internal processor and places it squarely on your shoulders in post-production.
The camera is basically saying, I saved all the data for you, but I made it look terrible in the process. Good luck.
That's exactly what it's saying.
That makes so much sense. So when you are looking at your monitor and it looks gray, it's not because the camera is broken. It's because the camera is giving you maximum raw materials instead of a finished product.
Deliciously.
We should also probably touch on HLG here, hybrid log gamma, because that is becoming a standard option on almost every prosumer drone right now. What is the math doing there?
So HLG is an entirely different philosophy. It was developed jointly by the BBC and NHK in Japan for broadcast television. It is the high dynamic range HDR middle lane.
Tied to the ITU-R rec.
Right.
2100 standard, right.
Right. The fundamental difference is that log is designed to capture high dynamic range, squeeze it into a standard dynamic range file, and then rely on you to grade it.
Okay.
HLG captures high dynamic range and bakes it into an HDR file that is designed to be played back specifically on HDR-capable monitors.
So it's playback dependent.
Very much so.
Yeah.
It uses a standard gamma curve for the lower half of the signal, so it looks normal on an old TV, but it uses a logarithmic curve for the top half of the signal to preserve intense highlights if the TV is HDR capable.
So HLG isn't just a cheat code for better-looking standard video. It's a very specific delivery path. Like, if I'm delivering a YouTube video that most people will watch on standard SDR office monitors, shooting in HLG might actually complicate my life way more than it helps.
It definitely will.
Yeah.
You have to actively transform that HDR color space back down to SDR, which introduces a whole new layer of potential color mapping errors if you don't know what you are doing.
Okay, I have to push back here, because if you spend like 5 minutes on the drone side of YouTube, you will see 100 videos with thumbnails of glowing cinematic landscapes.
Oh, definitely.
And the creators are aggressively telling you that if you aren't shooting in a log profile, you aren't a professional. They treat standard Rec 7 to 9 profiles like a total joke. So is shooting in a normal profile ever actually the pro move? Or are these YouTubers right? Are we just throwing away dynamic range if we don't shoot log?
What's fascinating here is that the YouTubers are generally conflating professional with cinematic, and they are not the same thing at all.
That's a great distinction.
High-level working professionals, the ones making a living flying infrastructure, news, or rapid turnaround commercial work, they choose normal profiles all the time.
Really?
Absolutely. Choosing log when you don't need it or when you don't have the post-production budget to grade it isn't providing flexibility. It is providing deferred confusion.
Deferred confusion. I love that term.
It's so true, though. Sony's engineering white papers explicitly state that S-Log is optimized under the strict assumption that grading will be performed in post-production.
So if you aren't grading, don't use it.
Right. If you are flying a construction progression update and the project manager needs the footage on a hard drive before you drive off the site, if you hand them slat, gray S-Log footage, you have failed the mission.
They'll think the camera's broken.
Exactly. They don't have time to grade it. They just need to see if the concrete was poured correctly. Throwing away dynamic range by shooting normal is only a sin if you actually needed that dynamic range. If the light is even and the turnaround is fast, the pro move is absolute efficiency.
Okay, so let's say we do need the dynamic range. The sun is blazing, the shadows are deep, and we decide we're going to use a log profile. We know we are scheduling a massive headache for ourselves at the editing desk later, but we accept the challenge.
Challenge accepted.
Let's talk about what happens when that plan totally falls apart. Because the source materials highlight some massive, very common traps that ruin footage. Let's look at how pilots fundamentally break their footage when they try to put that lamp back together.
It usually starts the second they import the footage into Premiere Pro or DaVinci Resolve. They see that gray, flat log image, they panic, and they immediately try to fix it using a LUT.
A lookup table.
Yes, a lookup table.
Yeah.
And they almost always use it completely wrong.
I see this constantly. People buy these cinematic drone LET packs for $50. They slap it onto their raw log footage, and they wonder why the sky turns radioactive cyan and the shadows look like they were painted with black tar.
It's awful.
What is a LUT mathematically, and why does it destroy footage when used incorrectly?
Well, to understand why it fails, you have to understand what a LUT actually is. A lookup table is not a magic wand. It is not some AI algorithm that understands your image.
Right.
It is literally just a dumb text file full of numbers.
Yeah.
It is a mathematical matrix. Every single pixel in your video has a specific numerical value for red, green, and blue. The LUT simply says, if you see an input value of X, change it to an output value of Y.
That's it.
That is it. It maps one specific color coordinate to another specific color coordinate.
So if a LUT expects a pixel to be at a brightness value of, say, 50, but because I underexposed my shot, that pixel is actually at a value of 20, the LUT has absolutely no idea. It just blindly applies the math.
Exactly. It does not know your exposure intent. It does not know if you completely messed up your white balance. It is just blindly executing a mathematical equation.
Wow.
And this leads to the massive workflow error that Adobe's documentation screams about, mixing up input LUTs and creative LUTs.
Oh, this is a big one. Let's define the difference, because this is the translator versus the wardrobe stylist, essentially.
Right. An input LUT, which is also called a technical LUT or a conversion LUT, is the translator. Its only job is to mathematically reverse the log curve you shot in.
So it puts the lamp back together.
It takes the flat, gray D-Log-M footage, unpacks the lamp from the crate, and stands it back up. It brings the footage back to a baseline, normal Rec. 709 color space.
Got it.
It restores standard contrast and standard saturation so your monitor actually knows how to display it accurately. It doesn't make it look moody or cinematic, it just makes it look real.
And then the creative LUT is the stylist. This is the Kodak film emulation, the blockbuster teal and orange look, the gritty, desaturated aesthetic.
Yes. And here's the critical point. Creative LUTs are almost universally designed to be applied to a normal Rec. 709 image. They assume the foundation is already built.
Okay, so what happens if you skip the foundation?
If you take a heavy, high-contrast creative LUT and drop it directly onto flat, unnormalized log footage, the math completely breaks down. The LUT is trying to add contrast to an image that hasn't had its baseline contrast restored yet.
So everything just warps.
The colors warp, the skin tones turn green, the highlights clip in weird ways. It's exactly like trying to paint a house before you have put up the drywall.
Yeah.
You were just spraying paint onto exposed insulation.
Or putting lipstick on a lens cap. You have to build the technical foundation first. First you convert, then you correct your exposure and white balance, and then, at the very end of the pipeline, you apply the creative style.
It has to be in that order.
Now, while we are geeking out on LUTs, the sources mention 1D LUTs versus 3D LUTs. What is the actual difference in the math there?
It's really about complexity and relationship. A 1D LUT operates on the red, green, and blue color channels completely independently.
So they don't talk to each other.
Exactly. It can look at the red channel and adjust its brightness, but it doesn't care at all what the blue or green channels are doing. It's essentially just 3 separate contrast curves. It's great for basic exposure or gamma adjustments, but it cannot handle complex color shifts.
Because colors in the real world interact with each other.
Yes, and that's where 3D LUTs come in. A 3D LUT maps colors in a 3-dimensional lattice, a cube. Imagine a 3D cube where the x-axis is red, the y-axis is green, and the z-axis is blue.
Okay, I'm picturing the cube.
Every specific color exists as a point somewhere inside that cube. A 3D LUT can take a specific point, say, a highly saturated, slightly warm yellow, and map it to an entirely different point in the cube, like a desaturated, cooler yellow, without affecting the other colors around it.
Because it's moving a single point in 3D space.
Right. It understands the relationship between hue, saturation, and luminance simultaneously. It's vastly more powerful for both technical conversions and creative film emulations.
So when you buy a LUT pack online, you are almost always buying 3D LUTs. Okay, let's move on to the next major post-production disaster, crushing the shadows.
Oh, this is painful.
I see this all the time. People want their drone footage to look epic, so they grab the contrast slider, they yank it to the right, and the dark areas of the forest or the shadows under a building just turn into black holes.
And they do that because deep, rich blacks feel premium. They feel like a cinema projection. But what they're actually doing is digitally deleting information.
Which defeats the purpose of shooting log.
Completely.
Yeah.
And this is a massive issue when you shoot in log. Canon points out in their white papers that Canon Log 2 can hold incredible amounts of shadow detail, up to 16 stops of dynamic range.
That's huge.
It is, but to hold that shadow detail, it has to compress it into the lower midtones of the file. When you do that, you are elevating the noise floor.
Let's explain the noise floor, because this is a crucial physics concept. What exactly is digital noise?
Digital noise is simply electrical interference. Every camera sensor generates heat and electrical static just by being turned on. When you shoot in a dark environment or in the deep shadows of an image, there aren't many photons hitting the sensor to generate a strong signal.
So the signal is weak.
Right. So the camera applies analog gain. It basically turns up the volume on the sensor to try and hear the light better. But when it turns up the volume, it also turns up the static. That static manifests as those dancing, buzzing red and green pixels in the dark areas of your video.
So when you shoot log, because it's actively trying to preserve the shadows, it's essentially turning up the volume on the dark parts of the image, which makes the noise much more visible before you grade it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sony explicitly warns about this, actually. Videos recorded with S-Log have more noticeable noise in dark areas. So if a pilot doesn't understand this, they pull the footage into Premiere, they see the noise in the gray, lifted shadows, and they completely panic.
And their solution is to just grab the black level slider and crush it all down to pure zero.
Exactly. Because if it's pure black, you can't see the noise, right? But you also can't see the texture of the trees or the detail of the roof. You've destroyed the very dynamic range you shot log to protect in the first place.
So what should they do instead?
You have to use careful noise reduction software and gentle curve adjustments, not just brute force contrast.
That perfectly transitions to the next pitfall, which is the opposite of shadows oversaturating. I mentioned this earlier, the nuclear grass, the neon water. It is an absolute epidemic in aerial real estate videography. You look at a golf course from a drone, and the greens look like they are glowing with gamma radiation.
It happens because log footage is completely desaturated by design. It looks dead.
Yes.
So the pilot applies a basic conversion. It still looks a little flat to their eye, and they just grab the master saturation slider and pump it to 150%.
And that breaks the image.
The problem is that aerial footage naturally features massive, monolithic blocks of color. Think about it. When you're on the ground with a camera, a scene is broken up by lots of different objects. When you're at 400 feet, half your frame might be a solid block of green forest, and the other half might be a solid block of blue ocean.
It's just huge swaths of monochromatic pixels.
Exactly. And a master saturation slider applies a blanket mathematical multiplier to every single pixel equally. If the grass is already relatively colorful and you pump the master saturation, the math pushes those green values way beyond what is physically possible in nature.
So how do we fix that?
Adobe's color science documentation actually provides the solution here. Use the vibrance control instead of raw saturation.
Mathematically, what is the difference between vibrance and saturation? Because they seem to do the exact same thing when you slide them.
Saturation is a blunt instrument. It multiplies everything. Vibrance is a smart algorithm.
Okay.
Vibrance looks at the image, identifies which pixels are already highly saturated, and leaves them alone. It only applies the saturation boost to the pixels that are muted or undersaturated.
That's incredibly smart.
It is. Furthermore, Adobe's vibrance algorithm specifically protects skin tones, the oranges and warm hues, from becoming unnaturally intense. So if you use vibrance on a drone shot, it might punch up the dull gray concrete or the faded roof tiles, but it will prevent the already green grass from turning radioactive.
That is such a massive tip. Use vibrance, not saturation. Okay, here's another massive trap. Trusting your eyes over your scopes.
Oh, man.
Let's say I'm editing a sunset shot. I'm on my laptop, my screen brightness is turned all the way up, and the footage looks perfectly balanced and beautiful to me. Why should I care what a graph in Premiere Pro tells me? If it looks good, isn't it good?
If you are editing purely by eye, you are flying completely blind. Your eyes and your brain are incredibly sophisticated organic liars.
Organic liars, I like that.
Adobe's color correction tutorials beat this into the ground. Human vision features dynamic auto white balance and dynamic auto exposure. If you stare at a screen that has a slight green color cast for 10 minutes, your brain will physically adapt, neutralize the green, and tell you the image is perfectly white.
Really?
Yes. You won't even realize the footage is tinted green until you export it, watch it on your phone the next day, and wonder why the client's white building looks like a hospital.
And the ambient light in the room you were editing in totally changes your perception, right? If I'm editing in a room with warm tungsten light bulbs, my screen will look cool and blue by comparison.
Precisely.
Yeah.
This is why professionals rely on scopes. The Lumetri scopes in Premiere Pro or the scopes in Resolve. They provide absolute, objective mathematical truth about your image.
Let's break down the two most important ones. First, the waveform monitor. I love the waveform. It looks like a glowing, fuzzy green mountain range that sort of mimics the shape of the image.
That's exactly what it is. It maps the brightness of your image from left to right. The scale on the left is measured in IRE from 0 to 100. 0 is absolute digital black, no light.
And 100 is absolute digital white.
Total clipping. If any part of that fuzzy green mountain range goes below 0, you have mathematically destroyed shadow detail. If it pushes above 100, you have mathematically blown out the highlights. Your monitor might be too dim, making you think the highlights are fine, but the waveform never lies. If it hits 100, that data is gone.
And then there's the vector scope. This is the circular graph that looks kind of like a radar screen.
The vector scope measures hue and saturation. The center of the circle is zero saturation, pure white, black, or gray. As colors become more saturated, the signal stretches outward toward the edge of the circle.
Okay, so a dot further out means more color.
Right. And the circle is divided into targets for red, magenta, blue, cyan, green, and yellow. If you shoot a snowfield and it looks white to your eye, but you look at the vector scope and the fuzzy blob in the center is leaning slightly toward the blue target, you have objective proof that your white balance is off.
The snow is actually blue.
Yes. The vector scope also features a critical marker called the skin tone line, which shows you exactly where human skin should fall, regardless of race or ethnicity. Because all human skin is essentially variations of blood under epidermis, which falls on a very specific angle of orange. Scopes protect your taste from drifting into nonsense.
Okay, so we've established the catastrophic mistakes pilots make at the editing desk. But all of these post-production nightmares, the crushed shadows, the neon colors, the blown highlights, they actually originate out in the field.
Always.
They happen because pilots fail to respect what the ambient light is doing to their sensor before they ever hit record. Let's shift out of the editing bay and back into the sky. The sources treat specific lighting scenarios as distinct strategic challenges.
The master concept here is that profile choice is fundamentally light management. You are assessing the environmental stress on your sensor and choosing which technical risks you are willing to accept.
Let's start with bright midday, high noon. A lot of new pilots think, great, the sun is out, I have plenty of light, the camera will love this. But bright isn't always easy. In fact, it's often the hardest light to shoot in.
Bright midday sun is incredibly cruel light. It creates severe hard-edge contrast. The sheer volume of photons hitting the sensor is overwhelming. Let's say you are inspecting a commercial roof. The dark tar-covered sections might be adequately exposed, but right next to them is a highly reflective galvanized steel HVAC unit. At high noon, that steel is essentially a mirror, reflecting the sun directly into your lens.
So the dynamic range, the distance between the dark tar and the blinding steel, exceeds what the sensor can handle linearly.
The lamp is way too tall for the crate.
Boom! There it is.
This is the scenario where a log profile is practically mandatory if you want professional results. By compressing the highlights, log ensures that the steel HVAC unit retains its texture and edge detail, rather than blowing out into a blooming, featureless white blob that bleeds over all the pixels around it.
What about snow? The training materials call snow the great liar. It looks so pristine and bright, but it absolutely tortures drone cameras.
Snow is a massive trap. First, it completely fools the camera's auto exposure meter. Most camera meters are calibrated to evaluate a scene and expose it so that the average brightness equals middle gray, about 18% reflectance. If you point a camera at a field of pure white snow, the camera's brain says, whoa, this is way too bright, I need to darken this down to middle gray. So it drastically underexposes the image, and your pristine white snow ends up looking like dirty gray slush.
So you always have to manually override the exposure in snow and push it brighter.
Yes, you have to overexpose by a stop or two. But when you push the exposure up to make the snow white again, you are suddenly dancing right on the edge of highlight clipping.
It's a tightrope walk.
Furthermore, snow acts as a giant, unpredictable reflector. It bounces UV light, it reflects the blue color of the sky, and it causes severe, rapidly shifting white balance casts. Because snow scenes often include very dark elements, like a dark pine tree line cutting through the white field, it becomes an extreme dynamic range test.
You're fighting clipping on the high end and noise on the low end.
Again, a flatter capture strategy like a wide dynamic range profile or log is often the absolute only way to survive a snow flight.
Let's talk about the absolute classic drone shot, sunsets and sunrises. They are undeniably beautiful, but they are punishing. You have a glowing, incredibly bright sun on the horizon, and the ground below is plunging into deep shadow. It's the ultimate silhouette risk.
This is the exact scenario that log profiles were engineered to solve. Sony and Canon both explicitly frame their log curves as the premier tool for preserving highlight roll-off.
Let's define roll-off.
Roll-off is how the camera handles the transition from a bright color to pure white. In a standard profile, the sun in a sunset often looks like a harsh, jagged yellow circle surrounded by a harsh white ring. It clips abruptly.
It hits a wall.
Exactly. Log softens that transition. It captures the subtle gradients of magenta, orange, and yellow, rolling smoothly into the brightest core of the sun while simultaneously retaining the texture of the dark ground below.
Okay, but here's my big pushback. let's say I'm shooting that sunset, and the sun completely dips below the horizon. The civil twilight ends. It gets genuinely dark. The dynamic range is no longer huge. The whole scene is just dim. I've always heard that log is the best profile for everything. Should I stay in log to capture those dark shadows?
This is one of the most critical misunderstandings in digital cinematography. If the scene is just low light, not high contrast, just overall dim log is actually the worst profile you can possibly choose. It can completely ruin your footage.
Wait, really? So if it gets genuinely dark, I should actually switch out of my pro log profile and go back to a standard normal profile? Why? That feels so counterintuitive.
It comes back to the physics of the noise floor we discussed earlier. To achieve its massive dynamic range, a log profile fundamentally alters how the camera handles ISO. Sony's technical manuals explain that S-Log forces the camera to use a different exposure method, which significantly raises the minimum available ISO. For example, your drone's normal base ISO might be 100, which is perfectly clean. But the moment you switch to S-Log 3, the camera might lock the base ISO at 800, or even 3200.
Because it needs that amplification to pull up the shadow detail.
Exactly. It underexposes the sensor to protect the highlights, and then violently applies digital gain to boost the shadows. In a sunset, that's a fair trade-off because you need to protect the bright sky. But in a dark scene, there are no bright highlights to protect.
You're not fighting a dynamic range problem anymore.
No, you're fighting a weak signal problem. You are starving the sensor of photons. If you use log in the dark, the camera is still aggressively applying that digital gain to the shadows, which pulls the noise floor all the way up into your midtones. You end up with a flat, washed-out image that is absolutely swimming in chunky, crawling digital noise.
That is wild. So log in the dark just amplifies the static.
Yes. In pure low light, a standard normal profile, which allows you to drop back down to a clean, native ISO of 100 or 400, and mathematically crushes the deepest shadows to pure black, where the noise hides, will give you a vastly cleaner, sharper, and more professional-looking image than log ever could.
That one tip right there just saves someone a massive headache. Okay, so we've mastered the light in the field, we've navigated the math of the sensor, and we understand how LUTs work. Now we need to synthesize all of this into an actual business strategy.
Because the goal isn't to just endlessly tweak color wheels in Premiere Pro.
No. The goal is to do exactly as much post-production as the specific mission deserves, and no more.
This is the dividing line between amateurs and working professionals right here. Professionals work backward from the final deliverable. The source materials implicitly outline 4 distinct lanes of post-production. The most successful pilots know exactly which lane they are in before they even take the drone out of the case.
Let's break down these 4 lanes. Lane 1 is the one that blows my mind because it feels almost lazy, but it's highly strategic. Almost no editing at all. You pull the SD card, you trim the heads and tails off the clips, and you export.
It feels lazy to a creative, sure, but it is incredibly efficient and often legally required for certain industries. This lane is for internal engineering reviews, raw evidence capture, or simple site documentation.
So they just want the facts.
The client isn't buying a look. They aren't buying emotion. They're buying objective, unvarnished access to information. If an insurance adjuster is reviewing a video of hail damage on a roof, they don't want a moody cinematic grade.
No, they want to see the hail damage.
Canon's guidance strongly supports this. Use standard profiles when you want edit-ready footage straight out of camera to maintain absolute reality.
Lane 2 is the quick turnaround. This is the social media reel for a real estate agent that needs to be posted by 5:00 p.m. or a rapid progress report for a construction manager.
In Lane 2, the footage does need a little bit of finishing, but you cannot afford a massive node-based grading session in DaVinci Resolve. You are making basic primary corrections.
Just the essentials.
Right. You drop a standard input LUT to normalize the footage. You tweak the exposure slider to make sure the midtones pop. You check the vector scope to fix any glaring white balance issues. And maybe you add a tiny touch of contrast. The goal is fast post-production with a visible professional polish. You are aiming for clean and intentional, not a premium film finish.
Lane 3 is where things get serious. Clean color correction. This is for high-stakes inspections in tricky lighting or corporate training modules where consistency is key.
Here, technical accuracy is paramount. You are spending real-time matching clips. If you shot the north side of a building at 10 a.m. under clouds and the south side at 2:40 p.m. under harsh sun, you have to use your scopes to manually match the contrast, black levels, and white balance so the sequence feels totally coherent to the viewer.
The image needs to look objectively right.
Adobe's color management pipelines are heavily utilized here to transform log media into standardized broadcast spaces perfectly.
And finally, lane 4, the deep grade. This is the Hollywood lane. Premium brand films, luxury resort marketing, high-end tourism reels.
This is where post-production is elevated to a true creative finishing stage. You are not just correcting, you are shaping.
Yeah.
You are using power windows to dodge and burn specific parts of the landscape. You are shifting colors to develop a specific emotional mood. And you are deploying heavy computational noise reduction in the shadows.
This takes serious horsepower.
It does. This lane requires massive bit depth, highly skilled labor, and a lot of computing power. Both Sony and Canon stress that their most advanced log curves are specifically engineered under the assumption that you'll be operating in this heavy, intensive lane 4 environment.
But I want to go back to lane 1 for a second, the unedited lane. Is it tough for creative drone pilots to accept that? Because I feel like as creators, we are programmed by YouTube to want everything we shoot to look like a blockbuster movie. It honestly feels like a failure to hand over raw, standard footage.
Oh, it is a huge ego trap.
Yeah.
Creative pilots often struggle to suppress their desire to make art when the client just needs data. But the reality is that over-editing an engineering or inspection report actively destroys trust.
Really? Destroys trust.
Let's go back to that insurance adjuster. If you hand them a roof inspection video and you've crushed the shadows to make it look epic, and you've added a teal and orange LUT because it looked cool, that adjuster is immediately going to think, what is this pilot trying to hide in those crushed shadows? Have they manipulated the color of the shingle?
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
You compromise the integrity of the data. Sometimes the absolute most professional move you can make is removing your ego, letting the image disappear into perfect neutrality so the actual content can speak clearly.
Wow. Over-editing destroys trust. That is a tough pill to swallow, but it makes perfect sense. So let's take those 4 editing lanes and push them back out into the field. How does a pilot decide their strategy on the job site?
The sources suggest a fantastic mental framework separating your flights into evidence missions and persuasion missions.
It is the cleanest strategic framework available for a commercial operator. Before you launch, you look at the client brief and you ask yourself, is the primary goal of this flight evidence or persuasion? Evidence missions are your cell tower inspections, utility line checks, volumetric stockpile measurements.
Exactly. The goal of evidence is legibility, trustworthiness, and technical repeatability. You want to show exactly what is there, clearly and accurately. In an evidence mission, a standard Rec 709 profile almost always wins.
Why is that?
Because it provides maximum immediate clarity, it locks in the contrast, and it ensures that if you fly the same route next month, the footage will look identical without needing a colorist to match it.
And persuasion missions are your destination promos, your luxury real estate, your car commercials.
In a persuasion mission, the goal is not just to document the geometry of a building. The goal is to make the viewer feel a certain way about the location. You want to evoke aspiration, excitement, or luxury. In these scenarios, a standard profile is way too rigid.
You need flexibility.
Right. Log profiles win here because you absolutely need the latitude to craft a polished, premium finish in post-production. The final, stylized look is quite literally part of the product being sold.
But here is the ultimate real-world challenge, the hybrid mission. Let's say a massive commercial roofing company hires you. The operations manager wants a detailed clinical assessment package to see the hail damage pure evidence. But the marketing director wants a glossy cinematic teaser video for their social media campaign to show off their massive scale pure persuasion.
And they want both from the exact same flight to save money.
Naturally, how on earth do you handle that without compromising one of the deliverables?
This is where amateur workflows completely fall apart and where pros justify their day rates. A professional handles a hybrid mission through strict physical and technical compartmentalization. You don't try to find one profile that does both. You plan the edit before you launch, and you fly distinct passes.
Explain that. What does a distinct pass look like?
First, you fly the evidence passes. You set the camera to a standard profile or a very mild wide DR curve. You fly methodically, slowly, with the sun behind the drone so the asset is evenly lit and shadows are minimized. You are capturing pure data.
Okay.
Then you land, swap the battery, and you completely shift gears into the hero passes.
You change the whole philosophy.
Exactly. You switch the camera into full 10-bit log, you change your flight dynamics, you fly faster, you orbit lower, you purposely fly into the sun to capture dramatic lens flares and deep, long shadows.
Because you're gathering totally different materials now.
You anticipate that the marketing team will need a heavy, aggressive visual treatment, and you capture the specific raw materials to support that. You satisfy the operations manager and the marketing director by treating them as two separate flights within the same booking.
That is brilliant. You are literally compartmentalizing the data capture from the emotional capture. Okay, so we have built the perfect visual workflow. We understand sensor physics, we've mastered the math of LUTs, we know our editing lanes, and we know our mission types.
It's a lot, but we're not done.
No, we're not. Because there is a massive unseen layer beneath all of this that dictates whether your footage is actually professional or if it is going to get you into deep legal trouble.
Yes. The technical and regulatory foundation. We cannot talk about professional cinematography without talking about the laws of data and the laws of the sky. Let's start with the hardware reality, which bridges the gap between color and data. Bit depth.
This is a crucial technical detail buried in the drone specifications provided in the sources. Take a highly popular prosumer drone like the DJI Mini 4 Pro. If you shoot in the normal color profile, the drone records the file in 8-bit color. But the second you switch to HLG or D-Log-M, the camera physically switches its processing to record in 10-bit color.
Which is a huge deal.
Yeah. Choosing a color profile isn't just about picking a nice contrast curve. You are literally changing the physical data container of the video file.
And the difference between 8-bit and 10-bit is staggering mathematically. When we say 8-bit, we mean the computer has 8 binary zeros and ones to describe the brightness of each red, green, and blue channel. 2 to the power of 8 is 256.
Okay, 256.
That means an 8-bit file can only record 256 shades of red, 256 shades of green, and 256 shades of blue. When you multiply those together, you get about 16.7 million total possible colors.
Now, 16 million sounds like a lot of colors.
It sounds like a lot, but it isn't. Not when you are talking about smooth gradients like a blue sky. If you try to heavily color grade an 8-bit sky, you will quickly stretch the math too thin, and the sky will literally break apart into ugly, stair-stepping bands of solid color.
Oh, I've seen that. Banding.
We call that banding. Now, 10-bit video uses 10 binary digits. 2 to the power of 10 is 1024. So 1024 shades of red, green, and blue. Multiply those together, and you get 1.07 billion colors.
That is a massive jump from 16 million to a billion.
It is exponentially more data. That extra data density is the glue that holds the image together. It allows you to push and pull a flat log image in post-production, stretching the contrast without the sky tearing apart into banding. But here's the catch.
There's always a catch.
If you choose 10-bit log, you are demanding a vastly heavier post-production pipeline. You are creating massive files, and you need a high-end computer processor to decode that math in real time while editing. Choosing a profile is a commitment of computing resources.
I want to briefly touch on another set of numbers we always see next to bit depth, 4.2.0. The specs say the drone shoots 10-bit 4.2.0. What does that actually mean?
That refers to chroma subsampling. It is the ultimate data compression trick.
Oh, this is fascinating.
The human eye is incredibly sensitive to luminance, black and white detail, sharpness, and brightness. But we are actually quite terrible at resolving fine color detail. Engineers realize that if they capture the black and white brightness of every single pixel, they can get away with throwing out half or even 3/4 of the actual color data to save file size, and our brains won't even notice.
So 4.2.0 is the formula for how much color they are throwing away.
Exactly. Imagine a block of pixels, 4 pixels wide and 2 pixels high. In 4.2.0 subsampling, the camera captures the brightness for all 8 pixels. But for color, it only samples 2 pixels in the top row and 0 pixels in the bottom row. It just copies the color from the top row to the bottom row.
Wow, it throws away a massive amount of chroma data.
It does. This is perfectly fine for normal viewing, but if you are trying to do heavy green screen work or extreme color manipulation in Lane 4 post-production, that missing color data can cause the edges of objects to look jagged and digital.
So knowing your bit depth and your chroma subsampling is just as important as knowing your color curve. Okay. Let's pivot to the final layer, which is the legal and regulatory reality, because all the 10-bit billion color grading in the world will not save you if the government comes knocking.
Color science does not exist in a vacuum. It is ultimately just one component of overall mission quality and legal compliance.
Let's look at the United States perspective, driven by the FAA's Part 107 rules.
Under Part 107, commercial flight is heavily regulated. If you want to capture that perfect golden hour sunset shot we keep talking about, and your flight extends into civil twilight or night operations, you're subject to specific anti-collision lighting requirements and training.
And airspace limits, too.
Oh, definitely. If you are flying over people to get a cinematic tracking shot or operating in controlled airspace where you need a LAAG's authorization from air traffic control, those are hard, non-negotiable legal requirements.
No cinematic LUT is going to fix an illegal flight. If you capture the most beautiful 10-bit log footage ever recorded, but you flew into restricted airspace without clearance to get it, that footage is not an asset. It is a documented confession of a federal violation.
Exactly. And the Canadian perspective is arguably even stricter in some operational areas.
Yeah.
Transport Canada's CARS Part 9X regulations?
Yes, the sources note that Transport Canada requires special flight operations certificates, or SFOCs, for specific high-risk flights, particularly advertised events.
And the critical detail here that traps a lot of pilots is that this SFOC requirement for advertised events applies even to sub-250-gram microdrones.
Oh, that's huge.
Many amateur pilots buy a DJI Mini 4 Pro, see that it's under 250 grams, and assume the laws of aviation simply don't apply to them. But if you fly that microdrone at an advertised public festival in Canada without an SFOC to get a cool cinematic crowd shot, you're operating illegally, regardless of how small the drone is.
There's also a fascinating regulatory issue raised in the sources regarding privacy as a post-production reality.
This completely bridges the gap between the field and the editing desk.
When I first read this, I was honestly pretty confused. What does privacy have to do with color grading? I'm sitting in Premiere Pro adjusting a contrast curve. How is that a privacy issue?
Because the camera captures everything, whether you meant to or not. In Canada, Transport Canada explicitly states that the drone pilot is responsible for the collection of personal information under the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act. Right. If you fly an evidence mission over a neighborhood to inspect a power line, and your wide-angle lens captures recognizable faces in a backyard or readable license plates on cars in a driveway, you have collected personal data. In the U.S., the FAA largely leaves privacy to state and local laws, but the civil liability remains immense.
So your post-production workflow isn't just about making the image pretty.
Not at all. Sometimes the absolute most important mission-critical part of your editing workflow is legally masking, blurring, and protecting identifiable data before you hit export. If you spend 5 hours perfecting the teal and orange cinematic grade on real estate video, but you fail to blur the neighbor's license plate or the face of a pedestrian walking by, you have failed the mission.
And opened yourself up to a lawsuit.
You have exposed your client and yourself to legal liability, rendering the color grade completely irrelevant.
That puts a whole new, massive weight on the editing process. It is not just art, it is legal compliance. So, as we bring all of this together, the sources provide an ultimate, field-ready mental checklist. It's a mnemonic device designed for pilots standing out there in the freezing field, feeling the pressure of the environment and the client. They call it the pressure ladder. Light, latency, look, and law.
It is a brilliant, instantaneous way to clarify your entire capture strategy before you ever push the joysticks.
Step 1, light. Evaluate the physics. How hard is the scene? Is it soft, easy, overcast light where a normal profile works perfectly? Or is it brutal, high-contrast snow and blazing sun where you absolutely need the latitude of a log curve to survive?
Exactly.
Step 2, latency. Evaluate the time budget. How fast do I need to deliver this data? Am I handing over an SD card tonight, meaning I must shoot edit-ready normal footage? Or do I have a week to carefully process 10-bit files in DaVinci Resolve?
Step 3. Look, evaluate the mission type. Does the client need technical accuracy and evidence for an inspection, meaning I prioritize clarity and repeatable Rec 709 standards? Or do they need persuasion and cinematic style for a commercial, meaning I prioritize dynamic range and a heavy grade?
And finally, step 4, law. Evaluate the reality. Am I flying legally right now? Do I have airspace clearance? Am I prepared to mask the privacy data I capture?
Light, latency, look, and law. If you climb that 4-step ladder in your head before every single flight, you will almost never choose the wrong color profile, you will never choose the wrong post-production path, and you will stay out of court.
It takes the guesswork entirely out of the equation.
It really does.
Well, we have covered an incredible amount of ground today. We completely dismantled the idea that color profiles are aesthetic filters. They are brutal mathematical data capture strategies.
A lamp in the crate.
Right. We learned that lookup tables are blind mathematical translators, not magical cure-alls. We learned how to read the physics of light, how to manage the noise floor, and that true professionals always always work backward from the final deliverable. The next time you look down at your drone's menu screen, do not ask yourself what sounds the most cinematic. You need to look at the environment, look at the timeline, and ask, what does this specific mission actually need to survive?
And if I can leave the listener with one final, deeply provocative thought to mull over as we wrap up.
Please do.
We have spent this entire deep dive discussing the manual, sometimes agonizing choices operators must make. Normal versus log, 8-bit versus 10-bit. But look at the rapid explosion of AI and computational photography happening in smartphones right now. How long will it be until enterprise drones start dynamically blending these color profiles in real time?
What do you mean dynamically blending?
Imagine a drone that utilizes an onboard neural engine to automatically shoot a standard Rec. 709 curve with heavy computational noise reduction purely in the deep shadows of the image, while simultaneously, pixel by pixel, applying a flat logarithmic curve to the bright sky to protect the highlights.
Whoa.
The AI stitches those two different data strategies together instantaneously before it even writes to the SD card. It would effectively end the era of having to choose a single profile. You wouldn't be shooting log or normal, you'd be shooting a dynamically mapped computational hybrid.
That is absolutely mind-blowing. The drone is doing the zone mapping for you. A dynamic, real-time hybrid profile.
It's coming.
I'm sure it is. Until that day comes, though, the pilot's brain is still the best, most critical image processor on board. You have to understand the math, the physics, and the law, and you have to make the choices. That's a wrap on today's mission, Commander. See above, go beyond, get ahead. For more training, tools, and intel, head to skycommander.ca. If you learned something new, share it, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star debrief.